course, you guys know my name is Laura Childers, and I love this work. The more that I do this work, the more that I learn what other ways that it can be helpful. Like I'm working with a therapist right now, and another therapist outside of me, and they're working. She's doing couples work, and I'm doing the brain-based work and some individual work. And it's really cool because when we redo the EEG, sometimes I can provide a truth that they had a visceral sense of, but they didn't necessarily couldn't put words to it. Like one of my clients was hugely stressed out, and the partner didn't like that was the addict. The partner didn't understand. She just knew that like he was doing things that were more addictive, like a whole lot of scrolling and stuff like that, kind of more addictive and stuff. And he just was shorter with her. And so I'm looking at his brain and I'm like, you know what? What's going on with you? Because your brain has moved back. It was doing way better and now it's moved back. And sure enough, at work, he put himself into a very, very stressful situation for a period of time. And so now we're working on, okay, can you get your brain back? So he's going to come back after their vacation in the summertime and see if he can't reset his brain back to where he's healthier in his functioning. And so, I mean, that was like invaluable, I think, for the partner. So just so much that I learned from doing this work, and I just really appreciate it. Appreciate that I happened into this. So let's go ahead and get started on the presentation here.
Right.
Um, And so the goal really of these presentations or the vision is to provide information and interventions that you can understand and really apply in your own work with sex addiction and partner betrayal trauma. So that's really what I'm hoping for that we're achieving. And the purpose of the presentation is to better understand how ADHD and addiction affect people, and to figure out why some treatments don't work well for them, find new ways to help them heal and recover. Some clients don't heal well. Some clients with addictions don't continue to relapse and relapse. And there are reasons. I've been sent clients and I can give reasons why they continue to relapse, which is really an awesome thing. So it's again, I'm just in awe of what we can do these days. So ADHD and addictions, I'm going to brain and medical implications. My goal on my part of the presentation is to look at a few brain signatures related to both ADD and addiction. And one is called beta spindling. And then the anterior cingulate, 100% of my addictive clients have a dysregulation in the anterior cingulate. Some of them that are more treatment resistant have it in both the anterior and posterior cingulate. And the cingulate is kind of how we focus our attention. It has both a thought part to it as well as an emotional part to it. And the anterior cingulate is what would help them to find things to satisfy their addiction. So brain signatures related to addiction, what happens when we add PTSD into the mix, and then medical complications that can cause issues with attention and possibly lead to addiction. And so let's look at brain signatures related to both ADHD and addiction. I want to talk about beta spindling. I see that typically in the frontal lobe. It's like a buzz that goes through that frontal lobe, and it's an over arousal. These clients that have this super duper fast in that frontal lobe, they tend to be treatment resistant. So whenever I see that, when I'm taking the EEG, I can see it immediately. And I know it's very likely that this particular client has very much struggled with probably going from addiction to addiction to addiction or just repeated relapses. And I know in this particular profile, self-care is paramount in their treatment. They tend to be over aroused in their addiction. They can also be obsessive compulsive, so they can have both obsessive compulsive and be over aroused. But this particular feature lends itself to overarousal and difficulty in the ability to self-soothe. So what they're doing in their addiction is they're just trying to calm or soothe what just doesn't feel good inside of them, what is just way too overaroused inside of them. They often they couldn't focus in school. They were likely the kid that was, disrupting or moving too much. But as an adult, it's very likely that they could be a CEO. They could be a professional athlete. They're driven at work, but at home, they struggle to emotionally connect. If they have daughters and sons, if they, their spouse, they often feel emotionally neglected from this particular client with this particular brain signature. Again, their addiction is often related to their inability to self-soothe. And because their brain is so fast, anytime your brain is too fast, you tend to be external. You externalize. And so you blame outward, um, as well as you externally soothe. So everything is outside of you. You really struggle to look inside of yourself with this particular phenotype. So beta spindling and the anterior cingulate. Now, if they have with both of these dysregulations, and if you have beta spindling, you have a dysregulation in the anterior cingulate, these clients are dopamine seeking. They often substitute one addiction for another. They struggle to remain sober. Their addictions are often like whack-a-mole. They get rid of one, and there's another one right there. They often also have family members with addictions, and often alcohol addiction. So what's the remedy for beta spindling type of ADHD and addiction? By the way, I see this type in kids also. I see the beta spindling in kids. And these kids are difficult to parent because they have trouble self-soothing. They have trouble sitting still. They have trouble paying attention. They get into a lot of trouble in school. Parents struggle to be able to help them stay regulated, and then the parents can at times blame each other, and so there ends up being parenting struggles as well as marital struggles, and it creates a big mess. It can create a big mess in the family. And when you're doing therapy with this type of child, you can also often figure out who the parent is that has the same phenotype, because this is genetic. This is a genetic phenotype, and it's seen in family lines. So remedy for beta spindling and types of ADHD and addiction. Remember that this client is over aroused. That's one of the big struggles. And when I look at clients who struggle to stabilize, when I look at the addict who can't get sober, what I often find is that there are several levels of overarousal, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in the medical section and then kind of as we move on. But it's not just one level. So many have some type of vigilance regulation issue or sleep disorder. They may need to look into some type of supplementation that will allow them to get better quality sleep, to calm their nervous system. They live in their sympathetic nervous system. So a vagal stimulator can be of some relief. It depends. Sometimes it's not helpful, but sometimes it can be helpful. Neurofeedback, neuromodulation, these types of things, so anything that's going to help this client switch over from that sympathetic to the parasympathetic. But you have to remember that they have this brain signature that's pervasive. And so if they are not doing really good self-care, it's very likely that they're going to run into some struggles in healing. And so this is the client that you have to make sure that they are doing their self-care. And if you notice that they're starting to slip a little bit, then you need to ask them about their self-care, because they've probably slipped in their self-care. And it may be that they're not sleeping well because this particular client, when they, in terms of sleep, beta spindlings, because it's an overarousal mechanism, interferes with sleep, and it creates a brain that kind of tries to keep itself alert or hypervigilant. And in doing that, um, it makes a downward spiral. So they're not sleeping, and then their brain is like, you have to stay up, you have to stay up, and they're not sleeping, and it gets worse and worse. And so they go into a downward spiral, and this is why they need more extreme health care than other or self-care than other populations do.
Can I
Uh,
add a thought here instead of swinging back to it later?
sure.
Um, I mean, and Laura already mentioned this, but just to kind of reiterate, it's like they're swimming upstream in a way because this is a genetic predisposition. There are other types of imbalances that aren't necessarily so genetically prone with ADHD and other things like that. But this particular over-arousal phenotype that she's talking about, it's their baseline, it's their norm. And so, it's going to need a lot of extra support for them to not kind of go back to their baseline, if that makes sense. So that's why this is a little bit more challenging to treat than others. Sorry about that. I just wanted to reiterate that.
You're good. You're good. So cingulate addiction. This is more the obsessive compulsive addiction. And so it's not specifically related to overarousal, although clients can have both. And then that's harder to treat when they have both. Um, Addiction comes, it's an attempt to stop the obsessive compulsive thought loops. The obsessive compulsive thought loops are very, very uncomfortable and they want them to stop. And so they do an action and the action makes them stop for a little bit of time. And so if you're thinking about particular clients this would go with, think about your pornography users. That they're having obsessive thoughts and then the compulsion is looking at pornography, and then they feel better for a period of time. These clients tend to be over controlled, and their interventions need to look at that rigid thought process that they have. RODBT tends to be better than, say, DBT because of the over control that they have. So if we have a combination of over-arousal addiction and cingulate addiction, these clients flat out treatment resistant. They will relapse often. They're the ones that our partners struggle so much with. Sometimes when they understand the objectives behind it, like why this is happening, because it feels so personal, right? And sometimes if a partner can understand the brain mechanisms behind them, which tend to be more objective, then that's helpful. So they may have other overarousal indicators. The other indicators, oftentimes they're highly intelligent. I see a lot that are very highly intelligent that, like I said, they're CEOs, they can they can hyper focus, and they're great at hyper focusing, not at the details. They'll have like a secretary to do the details, right? But their brain runs fast. When you're highly intelligent, especially if you're in the realm of gifted, then your brain runs faster, which leads to overarousal. And you also tend to have sensory processing or sensory integration issues. So you get overwhelmed easily. Um, and so sometimes they work to prevent that overwhelm. They may have a visual or auditory hypersensitivity due to PTSD, and that's what I was talking about earlier in the visual stream. And so let's say they're highly intelligent, right? So their brain's running really fast. They have beta spindle, so that's an overarousal. They can't focus, they can't sit still, and they have PTSD. So they're struggling to understand their emotions, and their visual stream is hypervigilant, right? And so they're going to get triggered more easily. They may startle with noises, things like that. They're not going to understand their emotions. And so that hypervigilance in that visual stream and sometimes in the auditory stream is an overarousal also. The neurons are firing too fast and they're overaroused. So I see many clients that have all three of these, right? They're intelligent, they have a sleep issue, they have PTSD. That the next one is insomnia, by the way. Let me go through all of them. Insomnia. So their brain runs fast. And so over the sensory motor strip, the brain will create faster brain waves so when they start to like fade during the day, the brain will put in those fast brain waves to re-alert them. So it's a re-alerting alerting mechanism. because our brain is amazing and it will create things to compensate for things that we're struggling with. That's an overarousal because, again, it's a fast wave that the brain has put into place. With PTSD, if if a client had, you know, some type of trauma where they were physically somehow in danger or the perception that they were physically in danger, then the brain can create fast waves over the sensory motor strip. Again, this is another form of overarousal, creates those fast waves over the sensory motor strip so that auditory, visual, and touch, you can be hypervigilant. So you are hearing, perhaps. And sometimes I see this in people who have been sexually abused, right? They are really scanning for noises, someone walking down the hallway, right? They're scanning for what they see. Okay, is this person okay today or not okay today, right? And so the brain, again, as a protective mechanism, creates really fast waves over that sensory motor strip. And that's another form of overarousal. And that is the last one. And that one I think of more as like walking on eggshells, when you have to walk on eggshells, say as a child or even an adult. Um, and so PTSD and addiction. PTSD exacerbates the beta spindling type of addiction. It exacerbates the overarousal. And so that's why a lot of clients who have addictions and have PTSD end up struggling with staying sober because they have this overarousal in them that is the PTSD. You would be amazed at how many clients I have seen, how many clients with addictions that I have seen that have some type of sleep disorder, not necessarily diagnosable all the time, but there is something going on with their sleep where they can't hold a vigilant state. Very common. And so the triad of treatment resistance that I notice in the brain is beta spindling, overarousal indicators like sleep disorder, cingulate addiction, and unresolved PTSD. That would be a treatment resistant client right there. Okay, and remember the beta spindling is a genetic. Uh, so let's look at ADHD, addiction, and the body. So let's look at, in terms of ADHD, there are a lot of things that can cause struggles with attention. In a lot of the kids that I've worked with, a gluten or dairy allergy, if they eat cake, then they can't pay attention. The brain creates these slower waves that just doesn't allow them to be able to focus and pay attention. Sleep quality. I have had younger clients the younger clients, it's so easy to see the attention struggles that they have when because they have to pay attention in school, right? And so I've had clients where it really seemed like that the child or adolescent, typically more like an adolescent, some of them even in college, that there was something not right, right? But nobody really knew what was not right about them. And turns out several of my clients have had narcolepsy, which means that their sleep quality somehow is so bad at night that they're falling asleep into micro sleeps during the day. Um, so I've seen the outcome of that be severe depression. I've seen another outcome of it be in terms of an adolescent. That was an older person. In terms of an adolescent, I've seen it in behavioral struggles because they just can't stay awake. They have a short attention span. They get frustrated easily. They can't get their work done, and so it ends up in behavioral struggles. Physical structures in the head and neck. This is something that's come to my attention recently. And that is that, if you have a client who has TMJ or who has a lot of tension in their jaw, it is possible that they may have a sleep disorder related to their jaw. And so, what I mean by that is, and I'm going to go back to my children because, this is where it's just developing, right? So I'm going to go back to that developmental stage. In children, what we can find is sometimes their jaw is maybe too small. or it's misaligned. And when they get further into adulthood, if it's not intervened with, it will create TMJ. As a child, what happens is that jaw can be too small and then it restricts the airway. And depending on how much it restricts the airway, that is going to create sleep apnea in that child. And their parasympathetic, or excuse me, their sympathetic nervous system is going to be heightened because their body is communicating, you're not getting enough air, you're not getting enough air, right? So they're always in the sympathetic state. Um, there's a there are a couple of books. I can't remember what the book is, but Heather might have it close by, and we can put it in the uh,
We're
okay, there
thinking
we go.
alike. We're
Heather
thinking
already
alike.
did it. She
I know.
already
I
did
had the hyperlink going.
it. Yeah.
So it's Secret Sirens, but I put the link in the chat. So this is a great book. Laura turned me on to this, but I see this in so many clients now that I know what to see because sleep issues is such a problem with addicts and people with ADHD, but even partners. And sometimes there's something more structural or functional going on, and we can't heal our bodies if we can't get into REM sleep because that's when basically the brain washes itself at night. So if you can't get down and have quality time in that NREM sleep and REM sleep, then you're going to have inflammation building up in your body. It's part of that spiral that Laura talked about before. So, like I said, this is what she was talking about just now, and the links in the chat. So
It's yeah, yeah, and any client that has TMJ, I would recommend kind of looking over the book to see if they have some of the other symptoms that you'll hear about in the book. I was amazed. I've now found that there's all kinds of books about the jaw and about the structure of kind of our airways and things. Environmental stressors, black mold, is going to create cognitive struggles. Other toxins can create they all create inflammation in the brain. And so you're not going to be able to pay attention. And if it's bad enough, you may not even be able to cognitively process. So I've seen this in some of my older population, actually, here in Houston. This is not an unusual thing. And so I've seen it in some of my older population, and they actually don't have cognitive decline. They are actually, and I can see the difference in the EEG, they actually have mold toxicity in their home, and so they have mold toxicity in their body also. Of course, genetic predispositions like beta spindling, family environment, parenting styles, stress and trauma. If there's a lot of, say, toxicity in a family growing up, then that's going to create that visual hypervigilance that I've mentioned. Anytime you have that visual hypervigilance, your brain is basically your amygdala is intercepting. It's intercepting visually, it's intercepting auditorily, and so you're going to struggle to pay attention with that. And so that's these kids that don't feel safe, they can't pay attention. Metabolic disorders, thyroid conditions, neurological conditions, and then comorbid conditions such as depression and anxiety are also going to do the same thing, to create issues with attention. So the power of a comprehensive approach. By recognizing the multifaceted nature of attention regulation, we open doors to more holistic healing approaches. So clients, we have teams here in my office that can help people with their diet, can help people with, how to regulate so that they can sleep better. Addressing underlying physical conditions like the jaw, considering environmental factors. We do a lot of lab testing here because anybody who has been highly traumatized or has, had a lifelong addiction or that type of thing, um, because their body has been in sympathetic overarousal for way too long. If they're in their 40s or above, typically I would recommend doing some lab testing to kind of see like some micronutrient testing, and then there's other lab testing just to see where their body, sometimes it doesn't show up on just regular labs. If they go to their doctor and get regular labs, sometimes you have to do other labs, but typically they are lacking somewhere, and that somewhere is compromising for them. And maladaptive coping strategies for overarousal. The maladaptive coping strategies are multiple addictions, switching addictions, going to alcohol, going to a food addiction or a binging disorder, workaholism, exercise, any of that can be, can become maladaptive, as we all know. And this is basically just switching addictions or playing whack-a-mole with your client, right?